What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Thursday Night Football between the 49ers and the Rams. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure. But first off, a look at the DFS side and how I'm building my single game lineups. Those will include some of the game scripting notes that we have for Thursday, the spread and injury report as well, who's potentially going to be missing the game, as well as some strategy and game theory notes on how to handle all of that exposure. And then afterwards, we're gonna focus on the pick'em and the prop side of things, some of my bets out there for Thursday, a couple slips, one on Underdog and one on Prize Picks that I've already mixed in to give you some exposure to potentially tail out there for the game and give you some strategy on putting together your slip. So a lot to go through here. It's not waste any time at all. It started off with first off a breakdown of the fantasy side and what we're doing on DraftKings. With a multitude of injuries on San Francisco, we got ourselves the Rams favored by 7 points. So before we even start talking about each player, it's worth noting that the vast majority of lineups are going to be maybe a 3-3 favoring the running back and more skill position guys on LA, or 4-2 or 5-1 favoring the Rams. And that is because of that 7-point spread. It's just something we've noticed over the last few years is anytime we get over that 4.5, that 5-point threshold on that spread, you see players really stacking that side. So don't be surprised if in your big single entry, some of your cash lineups, it's a whole lot of 4-2s in the LA side. So when we look at a Puka up top and he's nearly 80% combined ownership, it shouldn't surprise you all that much. Matthew Stafford, for example, is a little bit more popular than the quarterback on San Fran, who might be Brock Purdy, it might be a Mac Jones. We'll touch on that a little bit later on, but across the board, pretty much every position that you can compare, the LA Rams side is getting that steam. So before you build your laps, before you decide what kind of contest that you want to enter, you should probably know that. And if you plan on entering in the large field GPPs against 50 to 100,000 plus entries, then you might want to consider a more differentiated approach. Perhaps going with a 4-2 49ers stack is going to be utilized a lot less than their counterparts. Whereas if you agree with the chalk, you think the LA Rams are going to steamroll an injured and banged up 49ers team, then you might want to stay away from the large field GPPs, because if you're trying to beat a field of 100,000 other people with the chalky game scripts, that's going to be utilized by 25 to 30% of the field, and it's going to be really tough to do it in a unique way. So even if you win with that kind of a game script, you might be sharing it with 5 to 10 other entries, and that's sub-ideal. That's why I would say if you agree with that kind of a game script, to focus on single entries, some of the smaller field GPPs that you have out there to best utilize your exposure. So that's setting the table before we go player by player. But let's start with the Puka Nacua up top, who is $11,600, and pricing in general is a lot tighter on the slate. For the first couple weeks of the year, we saw DraftKings be extremely soft with it. You could play pretty much whoever the heck you wanted to for weeks 1 and 2 in Showdown. Now we've got a solid 5 players that are over $9,200. I guess 6 if we include a Kyren Williams down there, which means you can only take 1, 2, maybe 3 of those players in your lineup, and it makes it really tough to find value on it. So we'll talk about the kind of implications of that as we get towards the middle to the bottom end of the board, but a lot of concentrated ownership on values towards the bottom. But up top, that chalk is on the Rams side of things, and a Puka Nacua is deserved chalk with over a 22-point projection. His projection on sportsbooks is at 7.5 receptions, and he is used heavily towards the over. He's got nearly a 100 reception yard line as well. So I mean, just by far the alpha dog #1 fantasy wide receiver that we have in the NFL. So though he's expensive, and if you're going to use him at captain, it's going to be over $17,000. It's well deserved, and I'm going to have exposure there. Even if I am going with some slightly more differentiated lineups on the San Fran side, Puka Nacua would be seeing even extra usage through the air, as the Rams would be forced to pass if they're playing from behind. So even if you are trying to get some leverage in this large field contest, Puka Nacua should be a big portion of it. And of course, if you're going with the LA Rams led lineup and taking 4, maybe even 5 players on that side of things, Puka Nacua is likely going to be one of those options as well. So he's as close to a lock as you could possibly get. Really, the only reason he's not a stone cold lock for me this Thursday would be that price tag. He's prohibitive. It does have implications, and you got to give and take with the rest of your lineup because of that. So I'm probably looking at closer to 80, maybe 90% exposure myself, but he's the player up top that I feel the best about. Next up, we got a Christian McCaffrey at $11,400. He's the alpha for the San Fran side, and just like a Puka Nacua, he's got an extremely high floor. In fact, their projection's identical at 22.1 points. He's $200 cheaper, so you could argue that he's the slightly better option of the two. However, he's a little bit script dependent, because if they're playing from way behind, he's not going to get the kind of rushing usage that he's used to, and being 7-point underdogs, you could argue argue that he's not going to get those 20 carries you'd hope for. So the thing that's the saving grace that still gives him that solid floor is the fact that he gives you a lot of production on the ground as a receiver, right? He'll give us 5, even 6 receptions per game. This year, he's been giving us 50 to 100 receiving yards per game at that running back position, which means even if he's playing from behind, even if San Fran is in a very negative sort of game script, you're going with a 4-2 or a 5-1 led lineup on the other side, you could still use McCaffrey as a buyback because you almost treat him as a wide receiver when they're in that kind of a game script. And considering that it's a touchdown difference between these two teams, that's reasonable to expect. So you could even use him at captain if you're going with a 4-2 or a 5-1 on the other side. He's one of the rare players where you don't even have to stack him with the quarterback. You could use him alone, even in a 5-1 as the one player that you're using on the San Fran side. The only issue, just like what we had with Puka Nacua, is that price tag. He's over $17,000 if you want to use him at the captain spot. Even at flex, he's going to cost you an arm and a leg at nearly $12,000. But when you can fit him into lineups, I'm gladly doing so. It's just that with premier options on the other side of the game, he's not going to be nearly as much of a lock. So I'm going to have some Christian McCaffrey. He might not be a leverage play for me though, as he's 66 combined ownership between the flex and the captain position, which is a little bit harder to get over the field on. So I prefer a Puka Nacua. I just feel like he's the quote-unquote safer of the two, and the upside is about the same between them as well. Next up, we got these quarterbacks, and we'll start with the San Fran situation as it's a little bit more fluid. We've got Brock Purdy as questionable, has been extremely limited this week. In fact, has not even participated in practice so far. So at $10,200, there's a real chance that he's not playing, and that it could be Mac Jones suiting it up, who is $1,000 cheaper at $9,200. He's going to project about the same, so he'd go from a decent play at 1.5x points per dollar on a Purdy side to a pretty solid projecting play at Mac Jones at only $9,200. So if that's the case, I think it makes Mac Jones a slightly better play than what Brock Purdy is. But even if Brock Purdy starts, he's somebody that you've got to mix into builds. And in particular, if you're going with the underdog scripts, trying to get a little bit different in those large field GPPs, stacking up a Brock Purdy with a receiving option or two from the same team would make plenty of sense. And because he's not going to be as efficient of a price tag, down at just that 1.5x points per dollar mark, he's one of the quote-unquote lower owned plays that we have towards the top. And a low owned play up top is still going to get 30 to 40% ownership. That's just the way it works in NFL Showdown. The guys that are the most expensive are going to get played by default, as people want to spend all of their salary whenever they can. So Brock Purdy is going to be 30-40% owned because of that, but he's not going to be nearly as popular as Matthew Stafford, or probably a 15, maybe even a 20% difference in ownership when it's all said and done. In particular, if it's a Mac Jones who ends up being that starting quarterback, you've got Puka about 10-15% higher owned than a Christian McCaffrey. Pretty much across the board, if you go to the San Fran side, you're getting that lower ownership. So there's a time and place for playing a San Fran quarterback. It's just that I wouldn't be doing it in your big field single entries or your cash lineups where you're not really trying to get that differentiation. It's more so when you're being intentional, trying to get to those lower owned game scripts, you're going to see me playing a Brock Purdy. Whereas a Matthew Stafford at $10,400, $200 more expensive than a Purdy, he'll end up being $1,200 more expensive than they go to a Mac Jones. He's the best points per dollar play at that quarterback position. It's because of the higher implied team total that we have on the Rams. He's also juiced for his over at 1.5 touchdowns as opposed to a Brock Purdy. Assuming Mac Jones will be the same way, he's juiced towards the under at that 1.5 mark. So Stafford's the one that I'd be going to in those smaller field contests where ownership's not as big of a deal, and especially because I think the 4-2 stack towards the Rams is probably the most reasonable game stack to play for Thursday. He's going to be a big part of that, playing Matthew Stafford with at least one pass catcher. It's also worth noting that whether it's a Purdy or a Mac Jones for San Fran, that you're going to want at least one pass catcher along with those quarterbacks. Purdy does have a little bit of rushing upside, but not enough to play him naked. And then especially with Matthew Stafford, he doesn't have really any rushing upside to speak of. So you want at least one pass catcher along with him when you're using him, if not 2+ in a lot of those Rams-led lineups. So just something to consider with that position is that you do want to be correlating them with the rest of your lineup on top of the regular game script that you're playing for. Next up, we got Devontae Adams at $9,600. A little bit expensive, but he does have a decent raw projection at 15.4 points. The pricing isn't as soft as what we'd hope for. I mean, if he was in the 8K range, you'd be looking at 50% plus ownership, but because he's a little bit expensive, he's going to be sub 40% ownership across both spots. So could be a potential leverage play, in particular if you're playing that Rams-led stack. He's the quote-unquote low-owned skill position player that you have towards the top. Kyron Williams is down at at $9,000. And it's crazy that the sixth most expensive player is still $9,000. Normally, he'd be in like the 6 or 7K range at this portion of the board. So this is what I mean by the pricing's a little bit stiffer this time around. But a 1.8x points per dollar projection, don't forget about Kyren. In fact, especially because he's playing on the team that is favored by a touchdown, that would lead to even more usage for Kyren Williams on the ground in the second half. He's also been involved in the offense as a receiver through the first few games as well. So don't sleep on him even at the captain position as well. He's about 9.5% at captain. I'll probably have at least 20 to 25%. And if I'm playing in a cash or a single entry lineup where I'm going towards the LA side, Kyren Williams is probably my preferred captain, probably my favorite out of all the options that you have on that team. I think a lot of people are going to use a Puka because he has that really good raw projection. But if we're playing for correlation, if we're playing for a specific game script, the Rams playing from ahead doesn't really, I mean, sure, they have to score, they have to get the points to get the lead. I guess that's the idea with how Puka Nacua could get there. But if we're talking about who sees the benefit of that kind of a game script, it's Kyren Williams all day. They're going to try and run out the clock. They're going to try and protect the ball a little bit, not pass the ball all over the field. So that's why I prefer him a little bit over Puka, though both of them will be making their way into my exposure. Next up, we got these two San Fran wide receivers who are both technically questionable. If they end up playing, that's going to be massive for the quarterback's projection on the 49ers, but we're not sure on either player's status. So as of right now, I've got Ricky Pearsall is leaning towards out. If that's the case, could open up a little bit of wide receiver usage, whether that be Kendrick Bourne or some of these other wide receivers like DeMarcus Robinson on the 49ers side. Jauan Jennings, though, is looking like he's supposed to play. He's got a sportsbook line on almost all the major books. That's really the major tell that I have on a lot of these injuries. You can see participation reports. We can look at that. It just kind of gives us some baseline information. But if the sports books are willing to post lines for a lot of these players, it means that they think that they're going to be suiting it up. So Jauan Jennings is one of those players. 11.5-point projection as well is pretty solid. But if Ricky Pearsall's out, and that's what we're projecting for right now, he's going to be extremely chalky. In fact, that ownership number, which is about 35% combined between the two spots, would be close to 50% when it's all said and done. So, a few players that we're going to have to keep an eye on with their status, if one or both of them are out, would really change the dynamic of the slate. Next up, got the two kickers at $54,000 and $5,000. Both still appropriately priced. I've told you guys, I think these kickers should be around $6,000 for almost every single game. And they're not projecting through the roof because they have a 46.5-point total. Also, both quarterbacks are about even money for their over at 1.5 field goals. So it's not like they're expected to go out there and light it up from that perspective. But the ownership on both is in check right now. I've got both about 20% between the two spots. So if that's the case, I'll probably be getting slight leverage to both of them. But in particular, the Rams side of things, as they're the favorites, they're favored by touchdown, have that higher game total. That's massive for that kicker projection. Kendrick Bourne, we mentioned him potentially getting more usage if one of those two wide receivers ends up sitting for San Fran. Somebody to keep an eye on even if they both end up playing, as he's been playing snaps even when both are active. You got a Jake Tongas at $4,200. He's been playing a lot because Kittle's been out for San Fran. He's also been pretty effective as well, so he's touchdown or bust to get to the optimal lineup. But if you really need to save some salary in your cash lineup or single entries, he's got a pretty good snap floor to work with. Next up, we got these two defenses, which are more of GPP plays in my opinion. Not a lot of people are going to get there with the 46.5-point total. It's not like we're at a 50+ point total where no one will play the defenses and they're sub 10% owned, but neither defense is over 20% combined ownership. So I would say if you're going to play a Rams lineup, you're going to try and take some of that chalk. Not a lot of people are going to be using that Rams defense. And in particular, if you're going with a Kyren Williams at that captain position, assuming that they're controlling the script, running out the ball little bit in that second half, that would not only benefit Kyren, give him the extra usage, but it would mean that the Rams are in a good spot in that defense as well. So consider some correlation between the Kyren at captain lineups and then using Rams alongside with them. And then on the other side of it, everything we just said can be translated to the 49ers. If you want to run with a 49ers-led lineup, a 4-2, maybe McCaffrey at captain, consider using a 49ers defense alongside with it. Now, it's a little bit more of an outside game script to assume that the 49ers would kick some ass and control a lot of this game. But like I said before, when I saw that 7-point spread, I was a little surprised by it. The injuries make a little bit more sense, in particular if Brock Purdy ends up missing the game. But if they're active, I'm going to have some of those 4-2 issues, and the 49ers will be in some of those CMC captain lineups. They've got a Demarcus Robinson here who isn't my favorite play if both of those 49ers wide receivers play, but if one of the two ends up missing the game, he would be a square piece of value towards the bottom of the board. They've got a Tutu Atwell, had the big play for the Rams the last week out. He has not played very much at all this year, so he's pretty much big player bust. He would be a GPP only sort of option. Blake Corum has been seeing quite a few carries for the LA Rams so far this year. He's $3,000. Is about 20% ownership though, so you're not going to be the only one using a Blake Corum, but even with the usage he's been getting, it's 5 to maybe 8, 9 touches per game. It's touchdown or bust. Unless he goes out there and gets a big play, something like a 40, 50 yard carry, it's not likely that he's going to make it to the optimal lineup. You've got a Tyler Higbee who's also questionable, so somebody that you want to keep an eye on heading into Thursday's lock. $2,800, a piece of value towards the bottom end of the board. If he plays, he's a plug and play at over a 2.2x points per dollar value, but if he's out, that could open up some value to some of those backup tight ends on LA. You've got Brian Robinson Jr. has been seeing some snaps for 49ers pretty much every single week, about 3 to 5 rushes on the ground, and he's been effective when he's gone onto the field. But just like what we had here with the Blake Corum, he's got the same thing going on. He's not getting enough usage, and he's not a receiving back to the extent where he could get there at this $2,400 price tag without a touchdown. He's going to have to score. He's going to have to get a big play, 40, 50 yard rush, that kind of thing, to get to the optimal lineup. Same thing with the Kyle Juszczyk. He's $2,000. Sometimes he's like $200 or $400 on the slate, and maybe you play him, just hope that he gets you a reception or two, and that's his way to the optimal lineup. But at $2,000, he's going to have to get this 6-point touchdown to get to the optimal. A Luke Farrell, backup tight end for San Fran. He's been playing with the injury for Kittle as well, $1,600. Not as many snaps though, so I do prefer to go to the more expensive Tongas if I can. You've also got a Davis Allen down here. He would see benefit if Higbee were to miss some time. A Jordan Whittington, he played a little bit more last week than he has the entire year. That was because Devontae Adams was limited. He wasn't playing every single snap like he had for the first couple weeks. So I think it's going to go down in usage this week. A Jordan Whittington might not play as many snaps, but it's still somebody that's involved in the offense, and only $1,000. So in large field GPPs, I will be playing Whittington maybe 15 to 20% myself, maybe a little bit more than that. You can see the 14.6% at flex, so maybe closer to 25 to 30%. And then you've got a Sky Moore and a Colby Parkinson, another player that would see benefit if Tyler Higbee was out, but two players that, as of the current standing, I'm not expecting to be using very much. It's more of these reliable options that see the field every single week that I'm going to be using in my exposure. And like I said before, it really depends on the contest that I'm entering, the sort of lineups that you're going to see from me. In my single entries, it's going to be a lot of those 4-2 Rams lineups, but in my large field GPP exposure, which is some of my lower dollar stuff, I'm willing to take on a lot more risk because of the lower entry fees. You're going to see me taking a shots on some of these 49er players. And it might not be a big part of my portfolio if Brock Purdy's out, if one of those wide receivers for the 49ers is also going to be out as well. But if they're all active and that spread starts sneaking closer to maybe 6 or 5.5 points, I'm going to have a ton of large field GPP exposure going after that 49er side. So that's what I'm thinking for my single game lineups. I hope to see a lot of you towards the top of those GPPs. And now for the prop side of things, where we were super close last time out for our Monday Night Football exposure, with just a few Jake Browning attempts away from cashing, and the blowout script screwed us. They just ended up not trying towards the end. We were expecting them to be playing from behind, but not quite 3 or 4 touchdowns with a few minutes left. So unfortunate there that we couldn't get into the green for Monday, but let's try and run it back here for Thursday. So we've got 2 slips here that have already entered, one of which will be correlated, which you're seeing on the screen, and then one of which it just has value on the underdog side. So we're going to start with the correlated slip, show you some of the strategy involved with doing that, and we're getting a full 3x payout here. So despite some definite correlation between these two props, getting the full payout on Prize Picks, which is the sort of thing that we take advantage of at these pick'em sites. The single game parlay rolls on sites like DraftKings, sites like Hard Rock Bet that I have access to down here in Florida, are a lot more stringent on the correlation between these two spots. In fact, a lot of sites like Hard Rock or DraftKings will only give you like a 2.7, a 2.75x payout on those kind of combinations. No such difference here on the Prize Pick side. And let's start off with this over on Thomas Morstead punts. If you go to DraftKings and you take a look at the 7.5 line that they have for over and under punts, it's minus 135 towards the over. And of course, the San Francisco 49ers are 7-point underdogs, not expected to be nearly as efficient on the offensive side of things. So if they're expected there to be, 8, maybe 8 plus punts in the game, then obviously the 49ers side, the side that is not expected to be as efficient, would be the side that's expected to have more punts. So that's why I'm willing to take this over. It should be a little bit of line value on that spot. But on top of that, it's an offense that could be without Brock Purdy. He is questionable. We'll have to see what his status looks like as we get closer to lock tomorrow. But even if he plays, they still have that 7-point spread to deal with. And of course, injuries at that wide receiver position. So I like that fade, and it also leans into the other side of this game because if the 49ers are struggling, punting the ball, playing from behind perhaps, that's going to lead to extra usage for Kyren Williams, who we're getting here at 16.5 rushing attempts. There's a couple books around the industry, not every single one or anything, but a couple that have him at 17.5 attempts. He's gone over in 3 of his 4 games so far this year, and last year went over in all but 3 of his starts. So, I mean, this is the sort of line that he usually cruises over. I will say that Blake Corum did get a lot more rushes last week than a lot of people were expecting, and myself included last week. But even with that, you've got a more positive game script this time around. In the first couple weeks, it was not the same kind of workload for Corum. So it could have just been a 1-week aberration. That's personally what I think is more likely than the fact that Kyren Williams is, earning less of a job, because Kyren Williams last week was unbelievable on the carries that he had. I mean, he was far outpacing Corum in terms of efficiency, was averaging close to 8 yards per carry when it was all said and done. So I think if anything, he's earned even more usage. And what I'll throw out there, what I'll spitball, and if I was a coach and I knew that I had a Thursday night football game coming up against one of my division rivals, is I would not want to run my number 1 running back into the ground. So I think that's what was happening. They were giving Corum a little bit of extra run because of the short turnaround, so they can go out there and pound the rock against the San Francisco front. So that's why I took that over. Some correlation between these two, because if the Rams are leading like expected with that 7-point spread, that's extra usage for that rushing game of LA, and also potentially extra punts for that San Francisco side. So that's why I took that for 3x, a little bit of quote-unquote line value on either side. Again, it's up at 17.5 in spots. It was minus 129 towards the over on FanDuel, so a little bit of juice on our favor on that second one as well. That's the recipe for finding success, is you want to find line value, stuff that makes sense from the traditional analysis perspective, and then correlation whenever possible. But not every slip you're going to enter is going to have that kind of correlation, so it's worth noting that not every slip has to be built that way, and the second one is a great example of that different way to build. So let's start with this under on Puka Nacua fantasy points. So I'm sure when you first see that, it may raise some eyebrows because he's been unbelievable this year, but you've got to realize that the projection can only go so far. And on an underdog site, especially for these wide receivers on fantasy points, you've got to keep in mind that it's a half a point PPR. That's a big difference, especially for a wide receiver like Puka that is such a reception-driven player. And on Prize Picks, he's got a projection of 21 points because he's essentially got an 8 reception projection because he's at 7.5 and he shoots heavily towards the over. That's a 4-point difference from Underdog to Prize Picks. So that means that on Prize Picks, right, if we were using their point system and just making that 4-point adjustment, he'd be at 17 points. He's at 18.75 over here. So that's a much more optimistic projection on Underdog than what we have on Prize Picks. And he's got about a 95-yard projection, which I tend to agree with. I think he should be about 95 yards. He's got the 8 reception line. That means he's got to score a touchdown to go over this. And by the way, on sportsbooks, he's minus 130 to minus 140 not to score. So he's more likely not to score than to score if you take a look at the sportsbook lines and you're using that as your projection. So he's juiced under for that. Let's assume that he doesn't score then because he's not expected to score. That means that with the 95-yard projection, he's got to catch like 16 balls to go over that 18.75 mark. Let's assume that he does score then, right? If he scores and he puts up 90 yards, that's 15 points. He still has to put up 6 receptions on top of that to cover. You're essentially asking Puka to get to the 19 fantasy point mark to have a nuclear game. Now, could Puka do that? Sure. That's why I'm slightly scared about entering this sort of thing. But is that going to happen more than 50% of the time? Absolutely not. It's not, especially as 7-point favorites. It's not the kind of game script, going back to the first one that we played, where we're expecting them to be throwing it 40 to 50 times. They're 7-point favorites, could be going up against some of the backups for that San Francisco offense. If they were 7-point underdogs, this was the playoffs, they had everything to die for, I wouldn't be fading Puka Nacua here. But in the season, in a game that they're expected to win, I will absolutely fade this sort of a number. So, it'll be one that we're sweating the entire time. He's going to be getting a ton of usage out there. But like I said, if he's got 100, about 100 yards, he's got to post like 16, 17 catches to get anywhere close to that without a touchdown. So that's just why it doesn't make any sense to me. And then the other one that we've got here would be this Christian McCaffrey over in touchdowns. He's about -130 towards his over on the 2-way market on Pinnacle. The reason why we use the Pinnacle odds and not some of the other sports books out there is that you can take the over and the under. So that market is a lot more efficient. It's a lot more indicative of the actual percentage chance of something happening. And a lot of the other books, like Hard Rock Bet has a -145 to score. A lot of your major books like Underdog, like DraftKings, FanDuel, all of those, they have them at close to like -135, -140 to score. CMC, and especially if it's no Brock Purdy, if it's going to be Mac Jones going, he's going to be that entire offense. He's been getting spam receptions out of the backfield, getting closer even over 100 receiving yards at time to time this year, whether it's on the ground or whether it's through the air. He's got a ton of touchdown equity, and this is a 46.5 point total game. There's expected to be scoring. They are 7-point underdogs, but they're still expected to be in it as an offense. And if they end up having some of those wide receivers out, like a Pearsall, maybe a Juwan Jennings, end up missing the game, then he is quite literally the only receiving option that they're going to have out there. So it's not perfect game scripting. There's not really correlation between these two, which I'm okay with because they're both just blatant line value. Christian McCaffrey is going to score in 60% of his games. That's the kind of baseline. Actually, it's higher baseline than that. It's closer to 70, 75% over his last few years. You have to give him some regression this year, especially with the offense not looking as good. So that's why I'll put it at closer to 60% rate for this year. But we're getting it at even money. So I'll go out there, I'll mix it in for a 3x payout as an absolute no-brainer. And there's no correlation there, so I would not expect them to lower that payout in any other spots, but still line value. And you're not going to find this fantasy point line on sportsbooks. So that's the other thing that I do here on these pick'em sites is I attack categories that you're not going to find elsewhere, where we can find potential value like we found here and exploit it and mix it in for our exposure. So those are two slips that I've already mixed in for Thursday Night Football. If you guys want to see every single piece of exposure I'm entering, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. Over there, I post every single slip as I'm entering it, so you guys can catch those before any bumps and see the entire process for how I line shop. I go through, the projections for every player, the kind of correlation and game scripting that we're going with building slips, not only so you can tail that for your own exposure, but also to make you a better of the NFL. So if you guys want to learn some of that, get some coaching from that perspective as well, join the Patreon, again, link down below. NFL prop tier is how you get access to all of that. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. I appreciate all your support here on the channel as per usual. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our main slate preview dropping off in a few days, as well as all the content for all the Big Island games. And for a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, go ahead and give me your top score for the Thursday Night Football slate. And if you can give me that optimal captain, as well as their actual score within 2.5 fantasy points, you will win a free month access to all my Patreon projections. That includes the DFS sheet that you guys saw before with all my up-to-date point projections, ownership, also my entire player pool and stacking notes for how I'm building my lineups, and all the Underdog and Prize Picks stuff and Hard Rock Bet props that I'm entering for NFL as well. So go ahead, enter that giveaway if you guys haven't already. Again, just give me your optimal captain and what you think their final score is going to be, and that'll be their regular score, not their captain score. Just give me, like, for example, CMC and then 25 points. And if you get that correct, you'll win a free month access automatically. But that's all, guys. I appreciate your support on the channel. As I was saying before, let's have ourselves a Thursday night slate and get ourselves some bankroll heading into this weekend.